Hello, friends, and welcome to Jewels of Truth. My name is Daniel Fontenot, and today in this presentation, though it's supposed to be a quote-unquote short video, it's not going to be short, and I hope that you will stick with us during this presentation. Normally, like right now, I'm doing a series on the book of Revelation, and those are expected to be, long studies, up to an hour or more sometimes. And then the shorter ones are usually, 15 to 20 minutes, maybe half an hour at the most. But this one here is an exception to all of that. It belongs to the short video, group. But it is actually going to be quite a bit longer than just 20 or 15 minutes or half an hour. Because there's so much to this. The title of this presentation is Biden and Trump and the Repetition of History. Often people speak of, they say, history repeats, and things like, those who forget, I forget exactly how it's worded, but those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it. Okay. But I submit to you that history repeats a lot more often than what we realize, and more in detail than what we realize. And so it is, I believe, I am convicted that it is so with the present one that is in the White House right now, Biden, and also Trump. This is all, we are actually witnessing a repetition of history. Let us start with Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 9 and 10. And this is going to be the basis of this entire study. This is going to be the foundation of it. The thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, See, this is new? It hath been already of old time, which was before us. And again in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 15, that which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been. And God requireth that which is past. And then we have Revelation chapter 1. One thing that I want to say also before we continue here. These verses from Ecclesiastes, and maybe you've never thought of this, but I'm going to say it. These verses in Ecclesiastes, I believe they are not only speaking about Bible history. Okay, it's not just about Bible history. These verses are unqualified. God does not qualify what he's saying there in Ecclesiastes. This applies to all of human history. That which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been. Okay? And then in Revelation chapter 1, verses 17 to 19, I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending, saith the Lord, which is, and which was, and which is to come, the Almighty. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. And he laid his right hand upon me, saying unto me, Fear not, I am the first, and the last. I am he that liveth and was dead. And behold, I am alive for evermore. Amen. And have the keys of hell and of death. Write the things which thou hast seen, and the things which are, and the things which shall be hereafter. So John was bidden, he was commanded to write the things which he had seen in these visions there, which God reveals to him there in the book of Revelation. and the things which are. The things, in other words, the things which are the things the things which are happening right now, at the present, and the things which shall be hereafter, in the future, that is. Add to that Ellen White's statements in Testimonies to Ministers, page 116. Study Revelation in connection with Daniel, for history will be repeated. We, with all our religious advantages, ought to know far more today than we do know. And again, in the Great Controversy, page 343, the work of God in the earth presents from age to age a striking similarity in every great reformation or religious movement. The principles of God's dealing with men are ever the same. We need to meditate upon that, dear friends. The principles of God's dealing with men are ever the same. The important movements of the present have their parallel in those of the past, and the experience of the church in former ages has lessons of great value for our own time. This statement, this little paragraph in the Great Controversy, is not only speaking about the church, but also the world. And in another one, from Patriarchs and Prophets, page 373, God's work is the same in all time, although there are different degrees of development and different manifestations of His power to meet the wants of men in the different ages. And the reason why I emphasize the different degrees of development, or as in the previous paragraph, a striking similarity. When you think of something that is similar, when you have two things, for example, that are similar, they're not exactly alike. They are similar, but they still have, let's not forget, she says that the work of God in the earth presents from age to age a striking similarity. So they may not be exactly alike. You know, this event in at this time in history, and that event in this time of history, they may not be exactly the same, but there at the same time there is a striking similarity. Striking means it strikes the mind. It's like you're saying, you think, you know, wow, these are very, very similar. Okay? And I believe we will see this in this study of Biden and Trump and the repetition of history. Now, the premise of this study is to show that the last two presidents of the United States of America, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, have been prefigured by the Roman emperors Maxentius and Constantine, and that the deeds which these Roman emperors committed and the events which occurred during their rule will be repeated in the administrations of Joe Biden and Donald Trump, thus showing the end from the beginning. So let's look at the end from the beginning. Before Maxentius was made emperor of Rome, not long before, there was a revolt. So in A.T. Jones's book, The Two Republics, page 176, we read, just at this time there was another important move upon the stage of action. The people of the city of Rome were greatly offended at the action of Diocletian in removing the capital, and Galerius now took a step that deepened their sense of injury. A general census was begun to list all the property of the Roman citizens for the purpose of levying a general tax. Wherever there was any suspicion of concealment of any property, the citizen was tortured to compel an honest statement of his possessions. Rome had been exempt from taxation for nearly 500 years, and when the census takers began their work there, the injury which the people felt that they had already suffered by the removal of their capital was so deepened that they broke out into open revolt and proclaimed Maxentius emperor October 28th, AD 306. Now watch how Maxentius is proclaimed emperor. Maxentius was the son of Maximian, the prefect of the city, and a few magistrates who maintained their fidelity to Severus were massacred by the guards, and Maxentius, invested with the imperial ornaments, was acknowledged by the applauding senate and people as the protector of the Roman freedom and dignity. And that's from A.T. Jones. He's quoting from the historian Gibbon in the Two Republics, page 176. So, let's remember now, because I know there will be some that will probably say, well, they're not, there's no repetition of history here. But remember, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. It can be similar, but a striking similarity. In the summer of 2020, a few months before the presidential election, riots erupted in the United States. Though riots and revolts aren't exactly the same in definition, they are similar in action. Also, the investing of Maxentius with the imperial ornaments seems to be a sudden and impulsive action, unlike the ways in which other Roman emperors were placed into power. Not that every one of those emperors were always placed into power always the same. There are, even in those, some differences. So likewise, the way in which Joe Biden was placed in the position of president seems to be out of the ordinary. So, and we know about that. I'm not going to go into all of that sort of thing. I have my opinions about the matter, and I think they're probably similar to those of you that are watching this presentation. Maxentius now was not recognized as a legitimate emperor. Note this from Wikipedia: Marcus Aurelius Valerius Maxentius was a Roman emperor who reigned from 306 until his death in 312. Despite ruling in Italy and North Africa and having the recognition of the Senate in Rome, he was not recognized as a legitimate emperor by his fellow emperors. Okay? Now, I realize that as far as whenever it mentions by his fellow emperors, that's not the case with the election of Joe Biden. I realize that. But still, just the very fact that he was not recognized as a legitimate emperor by whoever is in itself a striking similarity to what happened and is still going on concerning the election of Joe Biden. And to emphasize this even more, we have an old, here at home, we have an old set of the World Book encyclopedias. And I took it upon myself some time ago to look up the list of Roman emperors. When you look up, the Roman Empire, the article on the Roman Empire in the World Book Encyclopedia, which was published around 1965 or so. And it was very shocking to me, but very enlightening to say the least when I found out, when I looked down that list of Roman emperors, guess what? Maxentius is not even mentioned in that list. He's not even there. And I looked at that there a few weeks ago, and then here a few days ago, I thought, okay, maybe I just overlooked it. I looked again the second time. It's not there. His name is not there. So it's no wonder that whoever wrote this article for Wikipedia says that Maxentius, was not recognized as a legitimate emperor by his fellow emperors. And also, Maxentius' rise to power is considered a usurpation. Wikipedia also calls Maxentius' rise to power a usurpation. and that the event went largely without bloodshed, which I think was pretty much the case with the quote unquote election of Joe Biden. It was without bloodshed, if I remember correctly. If I'm wrong, you can tell me in the comments. So, many do not recognize Joe Biden's election to the presidency of the United States as legitimate, and that he usurped the presidency of Donald Trump. The word usurpation is defined as follows: the act of seizing or occupying and enjoying the property of another without right, as the usurpation of a throne, the usurpation of the supreme power. So, and this is that definition was from Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary. Also, Maxentius's reign was short. A.T. Jones says in the book The Two Republics, it appears to have been Diocletian's intention that whenever the place of either of the two Augusti became vacant, it should be filled by one of the Caesars, whose place in turn should be filled by a new appointment, thus securing a permanent, peaceful, and steady succession to the imperial authority. Nor did the division and distribution of the offices stop here. It was extended in regular graduation to the smallest parts of the empire. Diocletian fixed his capital at Nicomedia, and Maximian his at Milan, which under his care assumed the splendor of an imperial city. The houses are described as numerous and well built, the manners of the people as polished and liberal, a circus, a theater, a mint, a palace, baths which bore the name of their founder Maximian, porticos adorned with statues, and a double circumference of walls contributed to the beauty of the new capital. By the taste of the monarch and at the expense of the people, Nicomedia acquired, in the space of a few years, a degree of magnificence which might appear to have acquired the labor of ages and become inferior only to Rome, Alexander, and Antioch in extent or populousness, according to Gibbon, the historian, and with the exception of the short reign of Maxentius, from the day when these two emperors made these two cities their capitals, no emperor ever dwelt in Rome. A.T. Jones, The Two Republics, pages 168 and 169. So, Maxentius' reign was short. It was only 6 years, just 6 years. So at this point, it appears that Joe Biden's presidency will also be short. When you look at the current news, even today, this day that we're recording this is March the 5th, 2024. Trump's chances of regaining the presidency are becoming more and more obvious, more and more evident. Another interesting parallel between Maxentius and Biden is that Maxentius was the father of two sons. The older son died first at the young age of 14. Joe Biden is the father of two sons. The older son died first at the age of 46, which is considered young. That's amazing, an amazing correlation there. Also, Maxentius was also considered cruel, rapacious, and profligate, that his reign recalled the times and acts of the worst emperors of the past. Rapacious is defined as greedy. Profligate is defined as reckless, extravagant, or wasteful in the use of resources. And the government under which Joe Biden is considered reckless, extravagant, and wasteful in the use of resources. Yes, recklessly extravagant and wasteful in the use of resources. And it's interesting here where when you look up the word profligate online, it gives a definition that I have here. reckless, extravagant, or wasteful in the use of resources. But also, when you look at the old Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary, profligate is defined as an abandoned man, a wretch who has lost all regard to good principles, virtue, or decency. The profligate son, there in the Bible, in the Gospels, I think both definitions would describe him. All right. So, here we come to Constantine's victory over Maxentius. I had to try to limit this because there's a lot of information that A.T. Jones and others give in regards to this history. So A.T. Jones in the book, The Two Republics, page 180, says, in A.D. 311, Melchiades wrote a letter to Constantine and sent it by a delegation of bishops to him at Treves in Gaul, inviting him to come to the relief of the church and the conquest of Rome. This is interesting here. Constantine deliberated, and Maxentius became more and more tyrannical. This implies, and we can see this, Biden is becoming more and more tyrannical. I don't know whether you could say that Trump is deliberating, but nevertheless, in A.D. 312, an embassy from Rome went to Constantine at Arles, and in the name of the Senate and people requested him to deliver the city from the despotism of the tyrant. Constantine gladly embraced the opportunity thus offered and quickly set out toward Rome. By this here, it seems to be pointing us to the possibility that there will come a time, probably, I would say personally, probably this year, when there will be more people than just the conservatives and the Republicans in this country that will have a big meeting and requesting, almost pleading for Trump to deliver them from whatever is going on in this country at that time, and it's getting to be more and more serious as we speak. At Turin, he met and destroyed a strong body of the troops of Maxentius. Now, before we continue this paragraph, let me stop right here and let me go ahead and read the statement that follows this before, okay, so you can get a full picture, okay? Let's leave that paragraph that I just started and go to the one below it from www.britannica.com, where it says, speaking of the Battle of Milvian Bridge, which was where Constantine defeated Maxentius. In regards to the Battle of Milvian Bridge, it says, which was on October 28, 312 AD, it says that a major battle in a Roman civil war between Constantine I and Maxentius. It was a major battle in a Roman civil war. So, now let's go back to the previous paragraph. Understand that this is a civil war, okay? So at Turin, he met and destroyed a strong body of the troops of Maxentius, and at Verona, after a considerable siege of the city and a hard-fought battle in the field, which, beginning in the afternoon, continued through the whole of the following night, he vanquished quite a formidable army. Now, one thing, and I forget whether it's in this paragraph or somewhere else that I read, but Constantine was greatly outnumbered by him and his army were greatly outnumbered by Maxentius and his army. But nevertheless, Constantine and his army were victorious. And that appears to be, as far as numbers, when you consider the globalists and all of the moneyed people in this country and outside of this country, Trump and his supporters are greatly outnumbered. But according to the verses that we read at the beginning of this study, the principle of the repetition of history, nevertheless, we can be confident not that I'm not for Trump. I want to make that very, very clear. Please, no one here get the idea that I'm a Trump supporter. In no case. I may be in agreement with some of his principles and the things that he stands for, but I am not a Trump supporter, never will be. Between Verona and Rome, there was nothing to check the march of Constantine. Maxentius drew out his army and met Constantine on the banks of the Tiber, 9 miles from Rome. He crossed the Tiber and set his army in battle array, with the river in his rear. The battle was joined. Maxentius was soon defeated, and his army, broken to pieces, attempted to escape. In the confusion and by the terrible onslaught of Constantine's veterans, notice it says Constantine's veterans, okay? This is pointing us to the fact that many of the veterans in this country support, probably the majority of veterans in this country support Trump. Veterans would imply not only people that have been previously in the military, but also just the older generation, okay? So thousands of the soldiers of Maxentius were crowded into the river and drowned. Maxentius, endeavoring to escape on his horse across the Milvian Bridge, was crowded off into the river, and being clothed with heavy armor was drowned October 28th, A.D. 312. And that's from A.T. Jones's book, The Two Republics, page 180. So, but one thing, I just want to make sure, because I know how some people think, don't think that I'm saying that this is going to be literally fulfilled, okay? That's not what I'm saying at all. It's not going to be literally fulfilled. I'm talking about there are the victory that Constantine had over Maxentius, okay, represents the victory that Trump is going to have over Biden. Okay, there are some words in this paragraph that kind of point to some matters, like when it says veterans, okay, thousands, Constantine's veterans, that is, okay, and all of this, there are certain words that actually point to events here at the end of the world. All right, so, all right, let's again read this next paragraph. So the Battle of Milvian Bridge, which occurred October 28, 312 A.D., was a major battle in the Roman civil war between Constantine I and Maxentius. After the collapse of the Roman Empire's second tetrarchy, Constantine and Maxentius asserted competing claims to the imperial throne. At Maxentius's goading, Constantine invaded the Italian peninsula. And it is without doubt. Everyone knows this. I don't have to tell you this, but I'll say it anyway. There have been competing, both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, they have both asserted competing claims to the presidency, just as Constantine and Maxentius asserted competing claims to the imperial throne. Okay, now we have the civil wars of the Tetrarchy. The civil wars of the Tetrarchy were a series of conflicts between the co-emperors of the Roman Empire, starting from 306 A.D. with the usurpation of Maxentius and the defeat of Severus to the defeat of Licinius at the hands of Constantine I in 324 A.D. So, because of the similarities between Maxentius and Joe Biden, and between Constantine and Donald Trump, and more importantly, because of the verses and statements quoted at the beginning of this study, it is evident that Donald Trump will be victorious over Joe Biden in the upcoming presidential election. And near the time of the 2024 election, a civil war will erupt in the United States, just as there was a civil war just prior to Constantine's victory over Maxentius. On a related subject, the history of the 15th and 16th presidents of the United States has a bearing on this subject. 22 days before Abraham Lincoln took office, the first civil war began in the United States. Therefore, we may expect that another civil war will begin in the United States around the time of the 2024 presidential election. The first civil war began on April 12, 1861, and Abraham Lincoln took office as president on March the 4th, 1861. All right. So we got that taken care of. Now let's turn to a false application, okay? What I mean by a false application is that there are some in this country who are comparing Biden to Pharaoh and Constantine, or rather Trump to Moses. Let me say it again. There are some in this country who are comparing Biden with Pharaoh and Trump with Moses. Okay, this is, I'm saying, a false application. In a periodical called Charisma Caucus, there appears an article on April 19, 2022, entitled, "Like Stubborn Pharaoh, Biden Doubles Down on Disastrous Policies," unquote. So, this magazine is claiming that Pharaoh, king of Egypt, represents Joe Biden, who is supposed to be the President of the United States. This is not only false, but this claim is itself, and this is the amazing thing about this, okay? You have a repetition within a repetition. What I mean by that, again, this is a false, the application of saying that Biden is represented by Pharaoh, in other words, he's the new Pharaoh, and that Trump is the new Moses, that's a false application. But this claim is itself a repetition of the claim that the bishop Eusebius, who lived during the time of Constantine and Maxentius, made. Absolutely amazing, dear people. You have a repetition within a repetition. If that doesn't convince people of the validity of this study, I don't know what will. So, Biden is not the new Pharaoh. Instead, he is the new Maxentius, as we have already pointed out. But who was Eusebius? Eusebius of Caesarea, also known as Eusebius Pamphilus, was a Greek or Palestinian historian of Christianity, exegete, and Christian polemicist. In about 314, he became the bishop of Caesarea Maritima in the Roman province of Syria, Palestina. Together with Pamphilus, he was scholar of the biblical canon and is regarded as one of the most learned Christians during late antiquity. He also produced a biographical work of Constantine the Great, the first Christian emperor, who was Augustus, between AD 306 and AD 337. So, now, as I've said here before, Constantine was not a Christian, okay? And it doesn't take a lot of research to find that out. How anyone who claims to be a historian or professional writer can make that claim is beyond me. You have to be purposely ignoring the truth. Okay? He was grossly pagan and grossly cruel. He was a criminal. So anyway, and by the way, kind of a side issue, and I meant to mention this at the beginning of this presentation. If you haven't watched the presentation which was made some weeks ago entitled, "Will Donald Trump Be the New Constantine?" you should go and view that. Hopefully you've all viewed that presentation before you came to this one. But nevertheless, if you haven't, you need to see that one also. So, so this is what A.T. Jones said. This is going to be a long quote here from his book, The Two Republics. A.T. Jones tells us, this theocratical theory of the bishops is the key to the whole history of Constantine and the church of his time. That is a very key statement. Okay? This theocratical theory of the bishops is the key to the whole history of Constantine and the church of his time. Why did this happen? Well, you have to go back to this. How did this come about? This, what Constantine did in mixing church and state, why did and how did this happen? He says, this theocratical theory of the bishops is the key to the whole history of Constantine and the church of his time. And through all the dreary period that followed, it led the bishops into the wildest extravagance in their worship of the imperial influence, and coincided precisely with Constantine's idea of an absolute monarchy. The idea of the theocracy, and you cannot have a theocracy without God himself ruling, dear people. Look up the definition of a theocracy. It's impossible to have a theocracy, a true theocracy. Israel of old was a true theocracy. The spirit of prophecy tells us that. Okay? It was ruled, that nation was ruled directly from God, by God. You cannot have that today, even though you have some people who think that they can have a theocracy on the earth without God being present. Impossible. The idea of the theocracy that the bishops hope to establish appears more clearly and fully in Eusebius's Life of Constantine than in any other one production of the time. And I would venture to say it's probably because of Eusebius's writings that today, even today, you have people who foolishly claim that Constantine was a Christian. There the whole scheme appears just as they had created it, and as it was applied in the history of the time. The church was a second Israel in Egyptian bondage, according to Eusebius. Maxentius was a second Pharaoh. Constantine was a second Moses. And so you can see, let me stop here in the middle of this paragraph. This claim is being repeated by some today. Go back to that heading up above on your notes, a false application, where they're saying that Biden is acting like Pharaoh and he's doubling down on disastrous policies, okay? As the original Moses had grown up in the palace of the Pharaohs, so likewise this new Moses had grown up in the very society of the new Pharaohs. So, again, this is a repetition of history. People are making the same claims that they made back then. That, and only in our case, in our day, it's, Biden is represented by Pharaoh and Trump is represented by Moses. So, thus runs the story. So here's Eusebius's words here. Ancient history relates that a cruel race of tyrants oppressed the Hebrew nation, and the God who graciously regarded them in their affliction provided that the prophet Moses, who was then an infant, should be brought up in the very palaces and bosoms of the oppressors, and instructed in all the wisdom they possessed. And when he had arrived at the age of manhood, and the time was come for divine justice to avenge the wrongs of the afflicted people, then the prophet of God, in obedience to the will of a more powerful Lord, forsook the royal household, and, estranging himself in word and deed from those by whom he had been brought up, openly preferred the society of his true brethren and kinsfolk. And in due time God exalted him to be the leader of the whole nation, and after delivering the Hebrews from the bondage of their enemies, inflicted divine vengeance through his means upon the tyrant race. This ancient story, though regarded by too many as fabulous, has reached the ears of all. But now the same God has given to us to be eyewitnesses of miracles more wonderful than fables. He's kind of, don't you think he's kind of implying that the record of ancient Israel's deliverance from Egypt was a fable? And from their recent appearance, more authentic than any report. So he's slightly implying that the history of Maxentius and Constantine, Maxentius representing Pharaoh and Constantine representing Moses, that's more authentic, is what he's implying here, which is a bunch of nonsense and heresy. But nevertheless, let's continue. For the tyrants of our day have ventured to war against the supreme God. Okay, he's speaking of the times of Maxentius and Constantine, and have sorely afflicted his church. And in the midst of these, Constantine, who was shortly to become their destroyer, but at that time of tender age, blooming with the down of early youth, dwelt as God's servant Moses had done in the very home of the tyrants. Young, however, as he was, he shared not in the pursuits of the impious. For from that early period, his noble nature, under the leading of the divine Spirit, inclined him to a life of piety and acceptable service to God. Boy, he's really bolstering Constantine up. Really making flowery language here. We have related how Galerius, A.T. Jones now takes up this history. He says, we have related how Galerius sought to prevent Constantine's joining his father in Britain, and how Constantine succeeded in eluding his vigilance. By the theocratical bishops, this was made to be the flight of the new Moses from the wrath of the new pharaohs. Thus the story continues. Okay, so here's Eusebius again. The emperors then in power, who observed his manly and vigorous figure and superior mind with feelings of jealousy and fear, carefully watched for an opportunity of inflicting some brand of disgrace on his character. But he, being aware of their designs, the details of which, through the providence of God, were more than once laid open to his view, sought safety in flight, and in this respect his conduct still affords a parallel to that of the great prophet Moses. Eusebius. Okay, now A.T. Jones says, as the original Moses without... Now, of course, let me just make this note here. A.T. Jones is not agreeing with Eusebius, okay? Let me make that clear. A.T. Jones is not agreeing with Eusebius. As the original Moses he's just interpreting and kind of expounding on what Eusebius is saying. As the original Moses, without the interposition of any human agency, had been called to the work to which the Lord had appointed him, so the theocratical bishops had the new Moses likewise appointed directly by the authority of God. Really? Now continues Eusebius. Thus then, the God of all, the supreme governor of the world, by his own will appointed Constantine, the descendant of so renowned a parent, to be prince and sovereign, so that while others have been raised to this distinction by the election of their fellow men, he is the only one to whose elevation no mortal may boast of having contributed. Wow. Really an exaggeration. Okay. So A.T. Jones continues, he says, Eusebius knew as well as any other man in the empire, okay, during the time of Constantine and Maxentius, he knew as well as any man in the empire that the legions in Britain had proclaimed Constantine emperor. It wasn't God that placed him there, precisely as the armies had been doing in like instances for more than 100 years. He knew full well that Constantine held his title to the imperial power by the same tenure precisely as had all the emperors before him from the accession of Claudius. In short, When the Bishop Eusebius wrote this statement, he knew that he was writing a downright lie. Everything he wrote about this matter was a lie. So when Constantine marched against Maxentius, it was the new Moses on his way to deliver Israel. When the army of Maxentius was defeated and multitudes were drowned in the river, it was the Red Sea swallowing up the host of Pharaoh. When Maxentius was crowded off the bridge and by the weight of his armor sank instantly to the bottom of the river, it was the new Pharaoh and the horse and his rider being thrown into the sea and sinking to the bottom like a stone, according to Eusebius. Then was Israel delivered, and a song of deliverance was sung by the new Israel as by the original Israel at their deliverance. Thus the story continues. Eusebius says, "And now those miracles recorded in Holy Writ, which God of old wrought against the ungodly, discredited by most as fables, yet believed by the faithful." Yeah, see, Eusebius is saying that these miracles recorded in Holy Writ, the Bible that is, which God of old wrought against the ungodly, and he has in parentheses, they've been discredited by most of the so-called theologians as fables. Okay, Eusebius didn't believe the Bible, but yet he's using this. He's hypocritically using the Bible to bolster up his claims that Constantine is the new Moses and that Maxentius was the new Pharaoh, which was drowned in the sea. And now those miracles recorded in Holy Writ, which God of old wrought against the ungodly, discredited by most as fables, yet believed by the faithful, did he in very deed confirm to all, alike believers and unbelievers, who were eyewitnesses to the wonders I am about to relate. For as once in the days of Moses and the Hebrew nation, who were worshippers of God, he cast Pharaoh's chariots and his host into the waves, and drowned his chosen chariot captains into the Red Sea, so at this time did Maxentius and the soldiers and guards with him sink to the bottom as a stone, when in his flight before the divinely aided forces of Constantine he essayed to cross the river which lay in his way, over which he had made a strong bridge of boats and had framed an engine of destruction, really against himself, but in the hope of ensnaring thereby him who was beloved of God. For his God stood by the one to protect him, while the other, destitute of his aid, proved to be the miserable contriver of these secret devices to his own ruin, so that one might well say, he made a pit and digged it, and shall fall into the ditch which he made. His mischief shall return upon his own head, and his iniquity shall come down upon his own pate. He's quoting from some verse there in the Psalms, I believe. Thus, in the present instance, under divine direction, the machine erected on the bridge with the ambuscade concealed therein, giving way unexpectedly before the appointed time, the passage began to sink down, and the boats with the men in them went bodily to the bottom. At first the wretch himself, then his armed attendants and guards, even as the sacred oracles had before described, sank as lead in the mighty waters, so that they who thus obtained victory from God might well, if not in the same words, yet in fact in the same spirit as the people of his great servant Moses, sing and speak as they did concerning the impious tyrant of old. Let us sing unto the Lord, for he has been glorified exceedingly. The horse and his rider has he thrown into the sea. He has become my helper and my shield unto salvation. I believe he's quoting here from the first song of Moses soon after the crossing of the Red Sea. And again, who is like to thee, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like to thee, glorious in holiness, marvelous in praises, doing wonders? And again, that was from Eusebius' quote here. So Brother A.T. Jones says, such adulation was not without response on the part of Constantine. Okay, so he's really pouring out all, Eusebius is pouring out all adulation upon Constantine. And so Constantine responded. He united himself closely with the bishops, of whom Eusebius was but one, and in his turn flattered them. So they are flattering Constantine in this whole matter. And Constantine is now in turn going to flatter them. So he says, the emperor was also accustomed... let me continue. Okay. Okay. I'm not sure. Anyway, so according to Eusebius, the emperor was also accustomed personally to invite the society of God's ministers, whom he distinguished with the highest possible respect and honor, treating them in every sense as persons consecrated to the service of God. Accordingly, they were admitted to his table, though mean or common in their attire and outward appearance, yet not so in his estimation, since he judged not of their exterior as seen by the vulgar eye, but thought he discerned in them somewhat of the character of God himself. Oh, this is so disgusting, dear people. How these men, they praised one another. Wicked men. This worked charmingly. I guess this is A.T. Jones here. Throughout the empire, the courtly bishops worked in Constantine's interest, and as Licentius only now remained between Constantine and his longed for position as sole emperor and absolute ruler, the bishops and their political church followers prayed against Licinius and for Constantine. And these worldly-minded bishops, instead of caring for the salvation of their flocks, were often but too much inclined to travel about and entangle themselves in worldly concerns, according to the historian Neander. Licinius attempted to check it, to stop their meddling with the political affairs of his dominions. He forbade the bishops to assemble together or to pass from their own diocese to others. He enacted that women should be instructed only by women, that in their assemblies the men and women should sit separate, and commanded that they of Nicomedia should meet outside the city, as the open air was more healthful for such large assemblies. And again, this was from A.T. Jones in The Two Republics, and I realize the page number there is not exactly correct. I think it's of course more than just page 269. All right, so now we're going to find the following quotation is from an introduction to a book written by Tom Strabo entitled Trump, the American Moses. So there you have some people today that are calling Trump Moses, just like Eusebius called Constantine the new Moses. The sentiments expressed are a clear reflection of the words written by Eusebius. Now watch this. This reflects what we have just finished reading from Eusebius in regards to that history. Our nation is being held in bondage by the liberal, politically correct establishment. We need to get our country back from who? From Pharaoh, the Washington, D.C. elite. We need an American Moses who will tell the crony priesthood of talentless moochers and looters, let my people go. Is Donald Trump the prophet for our time? The leader who can bring America out of its exile in the wilderness and lead it back to the promised land? What? Donald Trump, a prophet who hardly knows anything about the Bible and hardly knows anything about Jesus Christ and the Father? Continuing on this quote, America was great once, and it can be again, provided we get rid of the weak, pathetic liberals who wreck everything they touch. Liberals are the cause of the decline and fall of America. They are the last people to recognize that their craven weakness in the face of anti-American forces and cultures has led to the complete erosion of the traditional American way of life, which was the basis of American exceptionalism. The liberals have ceaselessly sinned against our manifest destiny. They are the problem, and we are the answer. They are the defect, and we are the correction. So, you see the reflection there between what I've just read to you and what Bishop Eusebius said about Constantine and Maxentius. And obviously they're saying, again, that Pharaoh is, rather that they're pretty much calling Biden and the elites the new Pharaoh. All right? This is a false application. So the title of an article published in The Independent reads thus: Actor Jim Caviezel proclaims Trump the new Moses after visiting him at Bedminster. Okay? And below the title of the article, these words appear: Actor who played Jesus in Mel Gibson's The Passion of Christ made the biblical comparison on Fox News. The article was dated July 21st, 2023. So Donald Trump is not the new Moses. Instead, he is the new Constantine, as history shows. As Constantine defeated Maxentius, so will Donald Trump defeat Joe Biden for the presidency of the United States. As Constantine made a profession of being a Christian, when in reality he was far from being so, so does Donald Trump make a false claim of being a Christian. He is so far from being a Christian that he has publicly stated that he felt no need to confess his sins before God. Confession of sins, as we all know, is one of the basic requirements for being a Christian. If you don't feel your need to confess your sins before God, you are not a Christian. As Constantine had the support of church leaders who wanted to use the power of the state to enforce their rules, so will Donald Trump have the support of Christians. Christians who want to use the authority of the state to enforce their religious laws. According to, back to A.T. Jones's book, well actually in the book, in the periodical, the Bible Echo, A.T. Jones tells us there had in fact arisen in the church a false theocratical theory originating not in the essence of the gospel, but in the confusion of the religious constitutions of the Old and New Testaments, which brought along with it an unchristian opposition of the spiritual to the secular power, and which might easily result in the formation of a sacerdotal state, subordinating the secular to itself in a false and outward way. That which they had in mind when they joined their interest to Constantine's was to use the power which through him they could thus secure to carry into effect in the state and by governmental authority their theocratical project. The state was not only to be subordinate to the church, but was to be the servant of the church to assist in bringing all the world into the new kingdom of God. The bishops were the channel through which the will of God was to be made known to the state. Therefore, the views of the bishops were to be to the government the expression of the will of God. and whatever laws the bishopric might deem necessary to make the principles of their theocracy effective, it was their purpose to secure. Says Neander, this theocratical theory was already the prevailing one in the time of Constantine, and the bishops voluntarily made themselves dependent on him by their disputes and by their determination to make use of the power of the state for the furtherance of their aims. And again, that's from A.T. Jones in the Bible Echo, August 30th, 1897. So are there any today who want to make the state subordinate to the church? Are there any today who want to make the pastors, the bishops, the channel through which the will of God was to be made known to the state? Are there any today that, according to this, the views of the bishops were to be to the government the expression of the will of God? Well, let's look here. The following article appears in Wikipedia concerning Constantine I. We'll get to the question here in just a moment. Here is part of the article. Constantine I was a Roman emperor from AD 306 to AD 337, and the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity. He played a pivotal role in elevating the status of Christianity in Rome, decriminalizing Christian practice and ceasing Christian persecution in a period referred to as the Constantinian shift. You should look up that word, the Constantinian shift. Constantine was also the originator of the religio-political ideology known as Constantinism, which epitomizes the unity of the church and state as opposed to separation of church and state. So where did this idea of the union of church and state come from? I always say, it came from the Catholic Church, but actually the Protestants of today got their idea of the union of church and state from the Catholic Church, from the papacy, which is in itself a union of church and state. But where did the Catholic Church get it from? From Constantine, which in himself was a union of paganism and Christianity. Okay, the state, because Constantine was also represented the head of state. So, Wikipedia also says this about Constantinianism. It's a little bit different word than the one, because one word says Constantinism, and the other one is Constantinianism. They are evidently the same. Constantinianism is a religio-political ideology in Christian politics that epitomizes the unity of church and state. This view is modeled after the ideal Christendom which arose during the reign of Constantine the Great. All right. So in other words, just to put it in a nutshell, this idea of the union of church and state as opposed to the separation of church and state comes from Constantine himself, which was a terrible, terrible example of a Christian. He was not a Christian. He was a pagan in practice and in doctrine. That's just to say the least. So, in an article published on June 27, 2022 in the Denver Post, the title reads, Lauren Boebert told the congregation she's tired of this separation of church and state junk. She is quoted in the article as saying, the church is supposed to direct the government. There you have it. The government is not supposed to direct the church. I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk. It was not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does. And I have to say, dear friends, that woman is ignorant. She's ignorant of this issue. She's ignorant of our Constitution. She's ignorant of the First Amendment. She knows nothing of what she's talking about. And to call that letter a stinking letter, she is just spitting on Thomas Jefferson as far as I'm concerned. And yes, the separation of church and state is in the Constitution. And I say again, if you don't accept that, then please tell me what part of the word no do you not understand? Because the Constitution, the First Amendment to the Constitution says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. But this is proof also that there are some, I don't believe that she is alone. I believe, but I cannot find the video again. I am sure that I heard the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, state the same sentiments here, that the church should direct the government. Something to that effect. In closing, God has revealed what is to take place in the last days, that His people may be prepared to stand against the tempest of opposition and wrath. Those who have been warned of the events before them are not to sit in calm expectation of the coming storm, comforting themselves that the Lord will shelter His faithful ones in the day of trouble. We are to be as men waiting for their Lord, not in idle expectancy, but in earnest work, with unwavering faith. It is no time now to allow our minds to be engrossed with things of minor importance. While men are sleeping, Satan is actively arranging matters so that the Lord's people may not have mercy or justice. Notice the next sentence. The Sunday movement is now making its way in darkness. The leaders are concealing the true issue, and many who unite in the movement do not themselves see whither the undercurrent is tending. Its professions are mild and apparently Christian, but when it shall speak, it will reveal the spirit of the dragon. It is our duty to do all in our power to avert the threatened danger. We should endeavor to disarm prejudice by placing ourselves in a proper light before the people. We should bring before them the real question at issue, thus interposing the most effectual protest against measures to restrict liberty of conscience. We should search the Scriptures and be able to give the reason for our faith. Says the prophet, the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. Review and Herald, December 11th, 1888. The main reason why I put that statement there, a number of reasons, but the main one is to show that these people like this woman, this congressman, Lauren Boebert, she's uniting with this movement, and she does not herself see whither the undercurrent is tending. She doesn't know, like so many in this country, among the professed Christian churches, they don't know where all this is going. And we need to make them aware. We need to warn them. We need to awake. God will not consider us guiltless if we do not make efforts to warn everyone within our sphere. Okay, so this is the end of this presentation. I hope this has been a blessing to you. I hope it has been edifying to you. I hope and pray that it has given you more confidence in God's prophetic word. Okay, I know we didn't read much from the Bible here, but let me emphasize again, these verses that we read at the beginning here, They do not only apply to Bible history. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, 9 and 10 and Ecclesiastes 3:15 do not only apply to Bible history. This is applicable in a broad fashion to all the history of the world. That which has been is being done today, right in front of our eyes, right before our eyes. So if you agree with this presentation, then please tap that like button so that this presentation, this video, can be sent far and wide to those who are hungering for the bread of life. And also, if you have any comments or questions, then feel free to post them at the bottom of this video. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we would highly encourage you to do so. We thank you for joining us here at Jewels of Truth, and we pray that you will have a good day in the Lord.